Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today I get to talk to somebody about cognitive science. Now I have to warn you, you may not be familiar with that term. We've already discussed the fact that I think it's a terminology that's just sort of crept up on us. So it took me a while to figure exactly what cognitive science is, and it's really the study of thinking. So we're going to talk to a psychologist, Professor Stephan Lewandowsky, who is in Bristol, England. He's a cognitive scientist in the department. He's the chair of their department in University of Bristol, and he did his PhD here in Toronto, so we have some common friends. Mm-hmm. All right, it's a pleasure to meet you, Stephan, if I may call you that.
Sure.
Do you call yourself Stephen?
Well, most people do. It's just easier.
I want to talk to you primarily about the kinds of issues that we all face these days when we are more and more surrounded with fake disinformation, or even I did a show last week with some people about deepfake, which I guess is a new term for videos that have been altered and made to look like real people saying things that they would never have said.
Yes.
So to me, that is one of the worst crimes that anybody could commit. You know, I think people who do things that way and actually trick us into believing it. Yeah. They should be put in jail for life. I mean, I'm hardly joking. I mean, I really think it's a very, very serious infraction on the basic human responsibility to be as truthful as possible, and to recognize truth and to try to discover and be faithful to truth. And the idea of distorting something and deliberately putting it up and misleading people is, to me, a terrible thing to do. And so there we go. How do we defend ourselves against such things?
Well, with difficulty. And part of the problem is that what we're experiencing now is the result of very systemic pressures that this isn't just isolated cases of politicians or other people, lying to us or getting it wrong. This is unfortunately very systematic. And at various different levels. So let me first talk about the technology involved, because most of us these days increasingly get our news online. And that means basically through Facebook or Twitter or some other social media. And the problem is that social media are curated by algorithms, by automatic programs that are up-ranking or down-ranking information in the hope that it will satisfy our preferences and that we will stay on the platform longer. Because that's how they make money. If you go online, you're the product. Somebody is selling your attention to an advertiser. And that's true on Facebook. It's true on X, what used to be called Twitter. And the list goes on. And so the problem is that we see stuff online that is designed to capture our attention.
Excuse me a minute, because you just gave me you just upset me.
Okay.
What we're doing right now, I'm going to put online. And
yes.
I put it on Substack and on our website, and on YouTube. And I try to get as many people as possible to watch it. And it's true. I really want people to watch it. Because I think that's my service to humankind, put out there good conversations about really important matters.
Sure.
And now you made me wonder when you say everything that you see online, there's some financial interest behind it. I'm not trying to steal anything from anybody.
Oh, absolutely. But if one of your users takes the link to this video and puts it on Facebook because then they liked it, then the fate of that information in other people's news feeds will be governed by algorithms. So anything that anyone posts on social media, and that includes news items, will appear in people's feeds based on algorithms over which we as a user have no control or very little control. And the same is true on YouTube. If you posted your video on YouTube, then yes, everybody can search it if they type in your name and they really want to see things. But about 70% of all videos on YouTube are not watched because people wanted to watch them. They're watched because the YouTube algorithm is suggesting a video to them. And so that's what I mean by information online being curated by algorithms. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is that the algorithms don't consider quality by and large. What they're interested in is to keep you engaged, because that's how Facebook and YouTube is making money, by selling your attention to advertisers, basically. And if you spend another 5 minutes on Facebook, then you're going to see 2 or 3 more ads. Well, Facebook makes money from those extra 2 or 3 ads. And so the problem is that human attention has evolved to favor negative information, outrage evoking information that makes us fearful and upsets us. Now, whether we like it or not. And there is a good reason for that. You can argue that, it was very important for us to detect the mammoth before it trampled on us and then to respond very quickly. So it makes sense for us through our evolutionary history to be attuned to threats. Now, of course, today, when we're sitting at home, there aren't too many mammoths out my window here that are threatening me. So this attentional evolutionary apparatus has now become less relevant. But it's still there. And whenever I look at news headlines, if there's something that's capturing that's making me outraged, then I'll pay attention to it.
Okay, now you've got me confused again. Mm-hmm. Because my worst problem is not, my business in a way is drawing people's attention to global threats.
Right.
We've got war and weapons, we've got global warming, we've got pandemics, we've got famine, we've got cyber and AI attacks, we've got radiation attacks, we've got human rights threats, we've got governance threats, etc. And that's my stock and trade. I talk about threats all day long. My problem is people are in denial. It's not that they gravitate to watch all of our scary conversations about horrible things that might happen. It's that they turn us off and pretend that there's nothing wrong. Now, excuse me, but how do you reconcile those two assumptions? I'm claiming anything that sounds like the opposite of what you're claiming.
Well, I would argue that if you ran an experiment with your headlines for your videos, and to be honest, I don't have them in front of me, so I don't know how fearful, outrage evoking these headlines or the titles are of your post. But I can guarantee you that they'll attract more attention than having a headline about some other event that was sort of positive, didn't evoke outrage. If you say immigrants are eating our cats.
No, I don't say immigrants are eating our cats. I say nuclear weapons might go off at any time.
Okay, but let me just continue hypothetically to make my point.
Okay.
If you have a headline that says immigrants are eating cats, and you have another one that says immigrants are contributing to the economy, guess which one is going to attract more views? Yeah. I can guarantee you it's the one about the false information that immigrants are eating cats because, whoa, man, that's, well, whatever it is, it's outrageous. It's making me angry, blah, blah, blah. And that is why, excuse me, misinformation spreads online, because the people who want to spread the misinformation, they know that they have to be outrage evoking or anger evoking. And so they will put up things like, oh, immigrants are eating cats, because they know, wow, everybody will pay attention. And so because everybody pays attention, Facebook will show it to even more people because they know that they can keep you engaged. So they make more money from your attention. And so that is a systemic problem. That is a problem of how the online information architecture is designed, that it is favoring information that, in a sense, isn't good for you. It's like pushing junk food on us. It's like having, chocolate bars and Kentucky Fried Chicken in front of your face all day, and you don't see the healthy tofu or whatever. Okay. That is what algorithms do.
All right. Now, I want to learn from these guys, because I really want to make everybody outraged that the fossil fuel industry continues to emit greenhouse gases, and they get subsidized to do it, and nobody's stopping them, and governments go on and help them, etc. I want to make everybody angry enough so that they will march on Washington or do something drastic. But I can't do it because instead people get elected to the White House who say there is no problem with global warming. That's what bothers me. I can't do this thing that you say that these big platforms are succeeding in doing. I wish I could.
Yeah, well, but I mean, the person who got elected to the White House doesn't just deny climate change. He is also the one who says immigrants are eating cats, and who's sprouting all sorts of other stuff that is, well, it's not even false. It is so grotesque that, it is just an operatic circus performance. And yet that worked for him. So it's if you can get people emotionally engaged, they pay attention to you, whether you like it or not.
Well, so I think the counterpart to the question of why we are so vulnerable to being outraged by anything somebody gives us is we are not vulnerable. We're in denial, or hell of a lot of people are in denial, and anything that looks like it might be upsetting, they simply say, well, it can't be true.
Well, they may say that, but I bet you, it would be interesting to run the experiment with your headlines, but I bet you that people are still paying attention to things if it is touching them emotionally, if they say, oh my God, So there's really very little doubt about that. And we can show that. We know that misinformation is mainly, or not mainly, but is very heavily negative in emotionality. It is outrage evoking, and for that reason, it has an advantage over true information. And that is the problem with the design of online algorithms, that for commercial reasons, which are totally understandable, they coincidentally, I don't think they designed it that way, but the algorithms learned that to make money by keeping people on the platform, you give them stuff that exploits their attentional biases, and that happens to be bad information, bad for democracy. So we have
untrue mostly, right?
And untrue. It doesn't have to be untrue, but if I produce an untrue message, it's very easy for me to tailor it so that, it attracts people's attention. And of course, I can then run compare different versions of that on Facebook, and I can detect which one works best, and then I say that more often or put out more of the same information. So it's very easy to. If you have the money, you need the money. But if you have the money, it's very easy to exploit what the platforms are offering. And so that I would say is a systemic problem. It's not something where you can blame individuals or where you can protect yourself as an individual, because it's forced upon you in a sense, in part.
What kinds of people are
Sure,
especially susceptible to this? What
sure,
kinds of people are more critical and say, hold on, I'm not sure I believe what you just said, that kind of thing.
absolutely.
Can you tell us a little about what, I mean, I have friends who are kind of conspiracy theorists. Now, and they seem to be very susceptible to misinformation. At
Yes.
least that's my
Yeah.
impression.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know what makes them inclined in that direction, but they're on the lookout for every new conspiracy that they can believe
Yes.
in. And
Yes.
I don't know, I'd like to know why and what kinds of people do that and how they got to be the way they are.
Right, very good question. And yes, of course, there are individual differences, and some people are more susceptible than others. And there's a number of factors. The first one, the one that is strongest in my opinion, is people's politics. Um, and this will offend some people on the political right, but whichever way you look at it, especially in the United States, misinformation consumption and sharing is far greater on the extreme right than it is on the left or the extreme left. There's an incredible asymmetry in this. And it doesn't matter how you measure politics, it doesn't matter how you measure the accuracy of information. This has been shown over and over and over again. So, um, for some reason, well, actually, for reasons that I think I understand, conservatives are more susceptible to misinformation.
Really? Okay.
Now,
That's my impression too. Now, but I
yeah,
mean,
there's no question. This is, we've shown this in our own research over and over again, and other people have shown it. All, I mean,
all over the world, it's not just Americans.
indeed, indeed, and well, it's especially pronounced in America.
Yeah.
And so, for example, our team looked at all tweets by members of the US Congress over a number of years recently. And we found there's a lopsided asymmetry between Republicans and Democrats, and Republicans are more likely, far more likely, to share low quality information than Democrats. And we also looked at Germany, the German parliament, and what we found there was similar, except the people who spread the most misinformation were not the conservative mainstream party, but the extreme right, the so-called AfD, which is the party favored by Elon Musk and J.D. Vance, but is basically a neo-Nazi party. They share most of the misinformation. The mainstream parties don't. So you're right. It's all around the world, and there is something about the extreme right that makes them spread more misinformation. There's
Okay,
no
now I
question.
think
That's
everybody is vulnerable. I myself am. When I talk to people, the first thing they say, they start talking about, my friends will start talking about media literacy, that somehow
uh,
I ought to inoculate
sure,
myself by learning how to check on facts. Well, now, frankly, I have never once, well, that's probably a lie, but I rarely actually stop what I'm doing to go look up something and see whether or not what I just read was valid and truthful or not. I don't even
sure,
really know how to do it. Call me media illiterate, and probably I'm not different from the average person. So I'm not about to accept that telling me that I ought to get to, smarten up and become media literate is just not going to help much.
No, it depends. It depends. If you actually teach people something that they can use, then it does make a difference. And we have done that. And that's called inoculation. And what we do there is to teach people to detect rhetorical techniques that are common in deceptive speech. So, for example, if somebody is incoherent, okay, then you don't really have to listen to them because you know they can't be right. And this is surprisingly frequent. Climate deniers, for example, will say, oh, everything is so uncertain, we can't even measure global temperature. And then seconds later, they'll say, oh, don't worry about global warming. It's been cooling for the last 10 years. How do you know that if you can't measure temperature? That's incoherent.
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of incoherent argumentation is quite common. And we can teach people about it, and then they learn to detect it. And then we can show that they become less susceptible to being misinformed. And there's a whole bunch of these little things we can teach people. Like scapegoating is another one. If somebody is scapegoating a group or a person, then that's an indication of likely misleading argumentation. If somebody is creating a false dichotomy, if they say there's only two choices, you're either for me or against me, then that's a pretty good sign that you probably don't want to listen too much to what that person has to say, because of course it's nonsense. There's lots of other options. You can be completely disinterested in a person. You can step outside this dichotomy, this false dichotomy. And so we teach people these things, and we have shown many times over that that moves the needle a little bit. People become more critical, less likely to share misleading information, and so that makes a slight difference. But let me remind you, I think it is also a systemic problem. So I'm happy to help people to become more skilled at detecting bad information. But I don't think we can rely on that. I do think a systemic problem needs a structural solution. You can't put it on individuals. In the same way, you can't dump climate change onto individuals and tell them, hey, just use less carbon. It's all your fault. No, it's not their fault. It's the fact that we have a fossil fuel-based economy, and it's very difficult to escape that. So you need a structural change to deal with climate change, and you need structural changes to deal with misinformation.
Well, what I'm wondering is, I think when we talk about how to teach people to check and to catch misinformation and, inoculate themselves, it assumes they want to. And I think that a lot of the people I know who have ideological hobby horses would not want to be corrected and do not want to know any more about the truth, because this is part of their sense of belonging. It's part of their identity. It's part of who they think they are, and they would lose their friends and their maybe marriage and everything else if they started challenging these things.
Yeah.
So please leave me alone so I can, enjoy my social life. And to me, if that's the motivation behind everything, how do you combat that with cognitive science?
Yes, it's a very good question, and you're right. However, even for those people, we have shown, colleagues of mine, that if you remind people of the importance of accuracy, if you just nudge people to consider accuracy, even those people become a little more accurate. Now, it's not going to change everything. It's not going to make them less committed to their cause, but it might mean that they're going to share a little less misinformation. And we have found in other studies, another team, that even people who distrust fact checkers are affected by what fact checkers say. So if a fact checker says that's false, even people who don't trust the fact checkers will actually reduce their belief in that misinformation. So they're again, I'm not saying that's solving the problem, but we can at least move the needle a little bit, even with those people. In fact, there's another recent study that was done by colleagues at MIT, and they showed that you can use AI, large language models, to persuade people who believe in conspiracy theories to basically leave that behind and to say, yeah, maybe that's not true.
Really?
Absolutely. And yes. And the reason this is to me very interesting because I well, let me tell you why this works. It works because the AI is instructed to argue with people and to use argumentation in their entire conversation, and to use evidence and to have an argument. And it turns out that's crucial. If you just tell the AI to just persuade people, that doesn't work. You have to tell the AI you must rely on arguments. And then what happens is that the conspiracy theorist who sits there and is interacting with this AI will try to argue with this thing, and they will eventually be convinced by what the AI has to say. And one of the reasons this works is because the AI is infinitely patient. A human being cannot keep their cool for that long, for however long it takes. Now, I don't know if you've ever spoken to conspiracy theorists, but I have, and I don't last. I just say, okay. Goodbye, and walk away, because it's just, my patience does not extend far enough. But the AI doesn't get tired. The AI doesn't care. So, they can have this wonderful conversation that just never ends, but eventually it makes a big difference. And it's very interesting to listen to the people who are in these studies saying, gosh, that's the first time I felt understood by this machine. And again, that has something to do with the fact that the AI is impeccably polite, infinitely patient, but is countering all the arguments. And that makes a difference, even to those people who most of us would think, oh my God, they're so deep down the rabbit hole. What are we going to do? And so I find that intriguing that we can have a machine that is actually doing better than human beings at persuading others.
Oh, that is so interesting. And on a whole bunch of different levels. I have 2 or 3 different angles that I want to pursue this. One is that, I'm a full-time peace activist. I have been, that's my main, stock and trade for the last 50 years is trying to promote peace. Well, I am not a good mediator. I'm good at fighting for a cause, but if I go in and try to be the conflict resolution expert, I last about 2 minutes because I get angry and I take sides, and there's no way I can be cool. Now, some of my friends go off and do research with people who are right-wingers. I have a very dear friend who did a study. Her book is called Stolen Pride, and it's about it's Arlie Hochschild. She studied people.
It's a fantastic book.
Yes, wonderful book. She's a dear friend. She studied the coal miners, ex-coal miners in Kentucky, and she and I had an argument about where she kept saying, that if I would just be patient and stop polarizing. She didn't use the word polarizing, but we
Mm.
hear the word about don't polarize. You should
Yeah.
try to find common ground. I
Mm.
can't find common ground. I can only argue. I'm pretty good at arguing rationally, but you're right. I don't stay with it. I get
Yeah.
mad. So if I could actually be the kind of bullheaded, debater that I do have some talent in, and just stay with it, maybe I'd have more success. But I never do. I always start off arguing, and when they don't see the light, I blow up.
Well, I sympathize. I sympathize a great deal. But let me pick up what you just said. The sort of recommendation: don't polarize. Try and find common ground. I think you know I have mixed feelings about that, to be honest. And the reason is that yes, of course, under normal circumstances, and maybe Canada is pretty normal still. You have a political disagreement with somebody, there's the Liberal and there's the Tory or the NDP or whatever, you have a sort of you can find common ground. Certainly, when I lived in Canada, which was now a long time ago, the politics was kind of yeah, it was there, and the disagreements were real, but it wasn't like that it was sort of dominating my life. Um, However, what do you do if the polarization is due to one party having gone completely extreme and off the democratic sphere? What do you do? And frankly, I think that's what's happening. That's what has happened in the United States with Trump. And I've been studying fascism and authoritarianism and all that stuff for 20 or 30 years. And I look at this and I mean, there's no, I can't just say that's okay or that's normal. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's authoritarian. I mean, there's no question about it that is what Trump and his team are trying to abolish democracy in the United States. It's as simple as that. And a lot of people may not like me saying that, but it's still true. You just count the number of anti-democratic actions and executive orders, and then, it's hard to walk away from that conclusion. So what do you do then? Are you going to say, "Oh yeah, okay, let's all sing around the campfire and have a little dance"?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. Really, is that what you want to do? And how can you depolarize in that situation without surrendering to fascism? I mean, let's be real here. How is that supposed to happen? So, and that to me is incredibly difficult and a real dilemma because, of course, who wants to polarize? Very few people enjoy this sort of brutal polarization. I don't. But there's no way I'm going to say, yeah, it's okay. Actually, due process, nah, it's overrated. If you want to snatch people off the street, send them to El Salvador, well, maybe you got a point. I can't say that. Sorry. It just doesn't, I'm not capable of that level of I mean, it's just not I can't. So, and then what do you do? And I think a lot of us are facing this dilemma now that to be seen as reasonable and accommodating and all the things we want to be, well, you would have to compromise with people who do not deserve to be compromised with, in my opinion. And so, yeah, what do you do? Well, I have no idea. But I don't know.
You did. I mean, you really did have an idea when you said that the AI was the one learns how to do it by just staying with it and continuing to argue and not losing your cool. I would say
Right.
that must be true as long as it's also true, which I don't know, that the conspiracy theorists themselves will stay with it and go through the argument. Just stay with the rationality, no matter come thin, high water or whatever. Just stay with the arguing
Yeah.
coolly and rationally, And it sounds like that is the winning strategy, but I can't do it very well. And I kind of wonder, I haven't even tried long enough to find out whether it's also true of conspiracy theorists that they will throw up their hands and get mad quicker than I do. I don't know.
Well, conspiracy theorists, in my experience, they love it when you engage with them because few people do. And so the engagement itself is already validating them. So if you can stick with it, good luck to you. Wonderful. Um, I personally can't do it because I don't have the patience. And I also don't think it's a very useful use of my time. I mean, spending 2 hours with one conspiracy theorist, is that worth it? Or should I spend those 2 hours, whatever, doing interviews or writing an op-ed for the Globe and Mail or something? I think it's just a matter of what's the most effective way
Oh boy, do I believe in that. I really think it's very, we'd solve a lot of problems if people conscientiously paid more attention to the question of whether or not what they are doing works, and then because I have friends around me now who are, okay, am I going to say this in public? I will. They're out right now doing a cross country march. Now, they're peace activists and I love them and they're my dearest friends and thank God they're there, but I don't think it works. But when I talk about, is this really a good use of your time? I think it's considered kind of not very much of a peacemaking kind of activity.
Well, I think, look, and that is, of course, the dilemma. And I'm not in a position where I can really make a judgment for anybody else. Just for myself, I try to think of, where are the multipliers? What is it that I really know how to do? And what can I do with that knowledge? So, for example, I now, as we speak, spend a lot of time with the European Commission in Brussels. And I've been working with them for years, many years. And I'm working on a report about the tension between technology and democracy, which might affect decision making in Brussels. Perhaps, maybe it won't, but, and if that happens, then the downstream consequences of that are far greater than whatever me talking to a conspiracy theorist or walking across the country in pursuit of peace. So, but that's my personal choice. I'm not going to tell anybody else that they have to do this. We all have to make our own choices.
Yeah. That's please elaborate on what you're doing with the EU or the European Commission, because when you say the effect of technology, what kind of technology? Are you talking about AI? Or are you talking about what else?
Online platforms.
Elaborate, please, because that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's online platforms, including AI, but mainly social media platforms. And well, I mentioned this already that I think some of the issues we're facing are systemic and require a systemic solution. But what is the systemic solution, right? I mean, that's what we have to look for. I put a link in the chat just now to the report that I wrote 5 years ago, the first report for the European Commission. The one I'm working on now, 5 years later, is an update to, capture the rapidly evolving situation in the world. So, yeah, I mean, it is possible to solve the problem by, regulating platforms. Now, they don't want to be regulated the same way the fossil fuel industry doesn't want to price in carbon, and the same way the coal industry didn't want to be regulated for over acid rain. Of course they don't like it. But it is entirely possible. For example, in Germany, they passed a law against hate speech online some years ago. And that has reduced the amount of hate speech online measurably. And I think at least half of all moderators employed by Facebook are based in Germany because the penalties are so severe that Facebook has no choice but to get their act together. So you can make a difference through regulation. It's not that hard. It's not really rocket science. It's a political battle. And it's not the technology. It's not that the technology is so out of control that we don't know what to do. That's not the case. The technology is politically out of control, but that's only because no one has said, whoa, 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 that's enough. You guys, back in the box. We need to regulate you. We need to tell you how far you can go with your, selling attention without considering the quality of information. And I can guarantee you that you could solve the disinformation problem and you can reduce polarization through regulation quite easily if only there were the political will and the power to do it.
Okay, now here's my dilemma. I guess most of my life I've been an advocate of free speech, and therefore censorship is a bad word.
I agree.
So, here we are, where I'm in a situation where I believe in my heart now that Facebook is putting up stuff that should not be put out there without a label on it saying this is very debatable. Or here's the source of this misinformation, if we can plainly call it misinformation, but at least say that it's extremely questionable whether this is true or not. Now, is that censorship? What is that? And who is going to be in charge of deciding what gets flagged as debatable or questionable? And do I have something to say about that?
Sure, good point. First of all, fact-checking isn't censorship, it's counter-speech. Okay? Now, the whole idea behind a free marketplace of idea, the entire American idea of free speech, is based on this notion of a free marketplace of ideas where the best ideas win out. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, we don't have that marketplace of ideas at the moment because we have a marketplace that's dominated by platforms who are pushing information that makes them money. Now, fact-checking is counter-speech. It is simply saying, whoa, this is wrong. So it's not censorship. Absolutely not. Anybody who says it is being disingenuous and is pursuing a political agenda. I feel quite strongly about that because how can me telling you that you're wrong be censorship? It's not. I'm just telling you you're wrong. I mean, that's tough luck if you don't like it, Get used to it. That's free speech. Welcome to free speech.
Except that you're going to have an agency or some department of Google or Facebook or Twitter or whatever that is responsible for deciding which of these misinformations need to be countered and challenged and which don't, and this is really hard to keep out of the political domain. In fact, it's in the political domain right now. I mean, that's what Trump is doing, and the some of these other outfits, right-wing outfits, are and in fact, I mean, that's when Musk took over Twitter. He changed the rules to allow, no hands, no bar against anything.
Well, that's actually not true. That's actually not true. No. It's not true at all. I mean, that was his public-facing pronouncements. actual fact, what he did was to change his algorithm to favor Republicans and suppress Democrats. Okay, so Elon Musk is probably the world's biggest hypocrite, among other things. I mean, he's winning a lot of competitions in these days, and certainly that for hypocrite, he's right up there, because all his free speech chit chat is meaningless because he is designing X to be a propaganda machine for the right wing. And it's we can measure that. Studies have been published on that. He's actually being sued by the European Commission at the moment because he has interfered. I forget now which election it was. Might have been the German election, might have been the European election. I don't know. But they're going after him because of a bias in his algorithm. He favored the far-right party in Germany during the last election in a lot of different ways. And in the United States, he was boosting Republicans and suppressing Democrats in his algorithm. So don't talk to me about free speech and Elon Musk in the same breath, because no, that's just a smokescreen. But let's go back to fact checking. Now, I agree. If there was a ministry of fact checking, I would be scared and I would oppose that. And if Facebook did all the fact checking, I would also oppose that. However, there are other ways of doing it, and that is the way it was done under the Biden administration, which is that Meta, Facebook, employed a whole smorgasbord of independent fact checkers, all of which were part of the fact checking association, whatever it's called, and who were accredited and had, that there is this sort of process in the same way that, doctors have accreditations, etc., so do fact checkers. And so there is, and independent fact checkers do a good job. Now, the other thing that's even more interesting is that if you get crowds of people who are politically balanced, that's crucial. If you get them to do the fact checking, they perform as well as fact checkers. So if you really wanted to solve the problem, you just recruit citizens who must be politically balanced. That is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, everything falls over. But if they're politically balanced, their consensus judgment, so long as you have about 20 to 30 people, their consensus judgment is as good and as reliable as that of fact checkers. So it is possible to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. And to then, send signals to the algorithms so they don't uprank information from dubious sources, but downrank it. It's entirely possible to do this. There's really no rocket science here. The Facebook in the lead up to the 2020 election tweaked their algorithm several times, and towards the end of that, people were not exposed to election-related misinformation, or only very little of it. So they know how to do it. And then after the election, they just said, oh, okay, it's over. And they took off all the safeguards. And guess what? Misinformation came back with a vengeance.
Now, that's an interesting, because I had an experience, I hope I'm recounting this accurately, but they stopped my postings on Facebook because I advertise things like what we're doing right now. I advertise it on Facebook that I want people to go and watch it. But they gave me a list, or rather I checked, and I found that they had a list of about 20 different topics during, at least it was before that election, saying you may not discuss these topics in Facebook. They would stop. And it wasn't that they took a position about whether I was right or wrong, or that I did good reasoning and had civilized conversations. No, it was just plain, you are not allowed to talk about this on Facebook for this, and whether it was per period of time or permanently or whatever, I haven't checked out. But they haven't been doing that to me lately. But they did block me, not because I was wrong, but because I talked about something they didn't want to have discussed. And that to me is very scary because I thought, during an election, for sure, you want to talk about these serious issues.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, and I didn't know that, but if we focus on misinformation and how things can be ameliorated, at least, I think there are answers, proven answers available to us. It is simply a matter of political will. And that means you got to have democratic control over the platform algorithms. At the moment, we don't. Users don't know what is being done to them. The platforms know everything about you, and you know nothing about what they do with that information. And I think that is a real problem. I personally think that is intolerable, and we should have never let that happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, bless you, because I would tend to immediately agree with you. I just simply don't know the facts of the matter. Mm-hmm. However, let's go to Europe, because you say you're dealing with the European Commission, and mm-hmm. Are they planning to do something new? My impression or my knowledge is that Europe has enacted certain kinds of legislation which restrict what the social media platforms can do. I don't know enough about it, and I'm right now organizing a public inquiry where we will be holding a series of 5 sessions with a selected group of members of Project Save the World and subscribers to our Substack. So people can join if they're interested in participating in this series. And we will together do something like a citizens' assembly, except that it's not done by sortition, it's selected. But we will be discussing all of these angles, including probably what we're producing right now. And one of the things that I need to know more about is what the Europeans have done. And I understand that the legislation that they have enacted, which does somehow restrict what the social media can do, that it's vulnerable, that Trump is going to put sanctions or do something to try to get every restriction removed from Europe. And can you comment on that?
Yes. Yes. Well, in fact, it's not just Trump. It's J.D. Vance, who threatened to pull out of NATO if the EU continues to censor the platforms, which, of course, the EU isn't doing at all. But it goes to show how intense the political battle is at the moment. And well, it reinforces what I said earlier about the United States abolishing democracy, because, this is just insane. It's like saying to Canada, oh, you don't have the right to exist. You'll become the 51st state. Well, I know how Canadians feel about that. You can now imagine how Europeans feel about being threatened and basically being told you cannot have laws that we don't like. Sort of, it's even the Russians wouldn't do that. It's like the Russians do that. They would want to do it, but would they really be stupid enough to threaten Europe to, you have to do this or else? I don't know. I don't think so. That's not to say that I'm no friend of Putin, let me assure you. Neither am I a friend of West Russia, that used to be called the US. So the problem is that the European legislation is not forcing the platforms to do much. Now, yes, they have an obligation to report how their activities are compatible with democracy. And they have to do certain things. For example, and this is one of the interesting things, what one of the laws is actually mandating for the platforms is that if they remove a post, that the user has a right to complain and to have the decision re-examined. So, in other words, the platforms are actually forced to give the users more of a voice.
I see.
Now, to me, that's the opposite of censorship.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I mean, anybody who knows anything about this knows that the EU legislation is not at all censorship. It is simply putting some responsibility on the platforms for the content that they're pushing. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's sort of the minimum. I mean, that's kind of like the least you should ask of a $15 billion business making money selling people's attention and their data. Well, surely at least they have to justify that they're not killing people, that they're not driving teenagers to suicide, that they're not causing, anorexia or whatever else it may be. I think to me that's just the absolute minimum. Mm-hmm. And yet they're objecting to that. And this is, to me, just yet another outrage of what is going on at the moment, that we have platforms, and I mentioned, anorexia and mental health, and that's not coincidental. That is because to my satisfaction, having looked at the evidence, I think it's very clear that social media use is detrimental to the mental health of adolescents. Now, there's some footnotes to this, and maybe the effect is small, but, I know enough to know that we have a real problem there. Okay. And it's like the tobacco industry saying, "Oh, no, we don't, we don't kill people, we just sell them tobacco." The social media industry is affecting people's well-being large scale, and they're refusing to acknowledge it, and they're refusing even, they threaten Europe instead of saying, yeah, okay, we got to fix this problem. I think that's just,
Okay, what's the status of that? When you say that Europe is going to, I presume you mean that there will be fact-checking of some kind. The question to me is, how is that made apparent to the user? Because I have never seen anything on a Facebook post or a YouTube post saying this video is doctored, it's not true. This morning, in my when I was reading the newspaper, I checked on YouTube, and there was an image of who is the young prince and the child who's about 10 years old, Prince William's son. He and the king are walking along, and he grabs the king somehow and pulls the king down and makes the king fall to the ground. Somehow, this is shown in a video. It looks real. There's nothing to indicate that this isn't really what happened. Now, obviously this did not happen, but there should at least be something saying this is a doctored image, right?
Well, indeed. Now, and well, there should be, yes, because those deepfake videos have an effect. In fact, I've got a series of studies with a PhD student showing that even if you tell people it's a deepfake, they're still affected by it. So in other words, it's not just a matter of identifying it. If people watch the video knowing it's a deepfake, they're still affected by the content. We can measure that. We know that this is happening, and that to me is, deeply problematic. Mm-hmm. So, but okay. So back to your original question: how exactly is this done? Well, to be honest, I don't know. I'm not on Facebook. I'm also not on Twitter. Because I do not wish to donate my time and my data to, platforms that I now consider to be very detrimental to our society's welfares. I also don't smoke, for example, and one of the reasons is that I don't want to give money to the tobacco industry. Mm-hmm. Of course, I also want to stay alive. So, there's a number of factors. So I don't know. What I do know is, that the European legislation is a baby step in the right direction, and I hope that the EU is fighting for that. The best indication I have is that yes, they are insisting on enforcing the law, but you never know what's going to happen if if Trump, whatever he may end up doing. I mean, you never know. He's capable of a lot of things, and I sometimes wonder what would happen in Toronto if the U.S. Army just showed up in the morning and kind of dropped in for a friendly visit and said, "Oh, well, you're now part of the U.S." I mean,
I know. I have friends who are actually working on that very possibility. What would we do? And they have some thoughts. But I've spent, as I urged a little earlier, I want to pick my fights. Or my activities, and that one is, I don't think, all that likely, and I'm not going to be spending my time preparing for that option, but it may be a time that
we live in interesting times where almost anything can happen, and I've given up my ability to be surprised. I retired that ability a long time ago.
Well, I hate to end on this downer because I like to think of some inspiring message that we can leave our viewers. But I think this time the message has to be gird up and get ready to defend democracy and human rights and truth.
But that's to me, that's a very positive message. I don't find, if we can get people to step up to the plate, then I think that's a good thing. And in my experience, they are increasingly so. And also, fear is contagious, but so is courage. And I'm interacting with a lot of courageous people online, even in the United States, and I'm very, gratified that they are remembering what America should be about.
Thank you. It's been a delight talking to you. Carry on.
Likewise. Take care.